Welcome to Like Minded with Dr. Patrice. Each episode, we'll be sitting down with different types of experts and unpacking the intersection of mental health, pop culture, and our day-to-day lives. My name is Dr. Patrice Lagoy. I'm an international psychologist, licensed marriage and family therapist, and former entertainment executive. This episode, we will be discussing how mental health is portrayed on television, representation of it on screen, structures to care for it behind the scenes, and everything in between. My guest today is Jose Alejandro Bastidas, television editor at TheWrap, one of the leading digital news organizations covering the business of entertainment and media, and the only independent trade organization. Previously, he worked as assistant arts and entertainment editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. He also served as a staff writer at popculture.com, based in Nashville, and as food reporter and digital producer at the Desert Sun, based in Palm Springs. Welcome, Jose. Thank you for coming. Yes, thank you so much. So, I really wanted to, as mentioned, kind of discuss how we see different portrayals of mental health. I feel like we're talking about it a lot more as society, and we're seeing it in the entertainment that we consume as well. So I think that over the last few years, we've seen shows like Euphoria, Ginny and Georgia, Baby Reindeer, and Sex Education, among many others, kind of tackle trauma, substance use, self-harm, and depression. And we've also seen shows that focus on the therapist experience. So the comedy Shrinking, which I love, even though it's not realistic, so everyone should know that. The documentary Couples Therapy, which follows a real-life couples therapist and her clients. How do you think TV's on-screen discussions of mental health have evolved? And I'd like to know if you think it's been a good thing, are you encouraged by it, or where you see some areas for growth?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that it's certainly encouraging to see how depictions of mental health have evolved over the years. It's tricky because I don't know if necessarily it's up to the individual creator to know if they're going to tackle mental health, or if they're going to use it as some sort of plot device in the story, or if they're actually, raising awareness for a condition. So that part is really interesting, but to me, it has been very encouraging to see how television has evolved in being more nuanced in their portrayals of these topics. And it's great to see. In a lot of ways, television can be a spotlight and a way to trigger important conversations in the public. And I mean, if people are watching these shows and maybe identifying things or finding some parts of it relatable, or maybe they watch something like Shrinking and are like, oh, maybe I should seek a fun therapist, just like that. Maybe that is a way that it's pushing the viewer forward and helping them. Oh, maybe I should look into this and ask for help. But then there's also the other cases where like mental health is maybe used as some scandal device or something like that. So it depends on the show, but I'm encouraged by it. I think a lot of it sparks a lot of really important conversations.
Yeah. I think you made a really good point about the motivation of the person who's creating the show. Sometimes I feel that people who are deciding to include mental health like in their shows, I feel like often they are motivated by that because of their own experience that they've had in mental health. And so you can sometimes see how that is then shown on screen. I do think that, there are plenty of examples also of when it's used to kind of make someone look bad or like to kind of write off someone's legitimacy. And so that can be a challenge, right? Because I think hopefully whether, it's from therapist's point of view or from, someone who's experiencing some challenges, it's normalizing talking about it a little bit. And maybe for people who don't see that elsewhere to see, okay, this person here is struggling with something that I've struggled with as well. And they're seeking out help, or maybe they're not seeking help. And I see kind of what happens, when they try to kind of go it alone. And so I do think that it's tricky, right, Jose, because I want to say there's a responsibility, but I worked in entertainment for years. Like, you also want to entertain. You want people to want to watch it and not just be like, oh, okay, that felt like, one of those, like, those television shows, like the television show, the special episode. That's what it, and like feel like it's preaching to you, right? So like, how do you think that that can be done successfully so it doesn't feel like someone's like this is what you need to do. This is the right way, you know, but it's part of just like the whole character, like showing whole people, right?
Yeah. I mean, like I think you hit it pretty effectively. You know, you don't want the conversation to feel like a PSA.
Yes.
You want it to feel lived in through what the characters are going through, and like have it feel organic, even though you are trying to tell a story or trying to highlight an issue or a condition that people are maybe suffering. And a lot of it can come from personal experience from the creators. It really depends on the person who's putting together the show and why they want to address the conversation. I think there have been some interesting depictions of, you know, characters going to therapy and maybe like finding a way to like crack an issue that they haven't found in their, you know, haven't been able to figure out on their own. I was revisiting a couple of episodes of a show that I loved, Station 19. It's Grey's Anatomy spinoff that ended last year. But during it was in 2020 they first introduced this character played by Tracy Toms, who is a former firefighter and now a registered therapist. And she was very probably you would think that it's not as realistic, just like shrinking, but she kind of like takes the approach of bringing her own story into helping the firefighters deal with the trauma that they're going through, and just have it be a very open conversation. Like it's not like I'm here to talk to you about this bad thing that happened. It's my door is open so you can talk about whatever you want.
Yes.
And I think that episode came out in 2020. It's one of the best depictions of therapy that I've seen ever, and like in some ways it helped me with stuff that I was going through, because I could kind of like identify myself in some of the issues that came up with just her having conversations with the different firefighters in the cast.
Yes.
And that was like, I think that was a really good way to do it. It also came out like, it was like the end of March 2020. So it was a time when I feel
a lot of people needed it.
We all needed
absolutely
some therapy. So I don't know. I think that episode specifically really stays with me. And like, as we were talking about having this conversation, I went back to it. You know, 4 years later, I still think about that.
And you still found it really moving in that way. And that makes me want to check it out. You know, it's also kind of making me think of about like 4 or 5 years ago. Like my dad was having some health issues, and like he'd pass out, and we didn't know what happened. He'd just pass out. And so the firefighters, like, you know, firefighters have to come, paramedics, like it's a whole crew, and they come, you know, they'd kind of be the same people coming over and over. So they kind of like get to know us. And at one point they were talking to me, and they were like, what do you do? And so I told them, you know, which is a loaded question, you know, like when you're a therapist, you know, how much you tell people. And they were all sharing how hard it is to live that life where you walk into a room, a situation, you have no idea what you're walking into, right? So traumatic, like often, you know, because not knowing, and then like seeing what that response is going to be from people that you're trying to help maybe. And then they said how difficult it is then to go home and like play with their kids, have a lighthearted chat, because they're holding so much. So that, I feel like that, you know, that conversation, of course, like really stuck with me, because I was like, hey guys, like you're here for my dad, but they, you know, they really needed to talk. So I feel like, I don't know, that I want to check out that episode, because I can see, you know, how you would feel compelled to like have someone to talk to, you know, in those kind of, especially in those kind of positions.
For sure. Yeah. And it was a very, like, not to spend the whole time talking about Station 19.
I know, but
it was a great episode, season 3, episode 10, if I remember correctly. And then they kept bringing her back like periodically to help the firefighters deal with whatever was going on in their lives. And they did a really powerful episode, I think maybe like a season or 2 later, that was the firefighters responding to George Floyd.
Oh, wow.
And they kind of like brought that part of real life into the narrative. And those discussions were also so important. And so it's like a way for mental health and therapy to also like speak to what's happening in the larger world And I sing praises of that character.
Okay, like no, I definitely need to see it.
But I would definitely, I definitely would recommend it. So I think that that's an example of a way that it can be done effectively for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and there's that point of view where it's done effectively, but also we've seen some, especially unscripted shows, some reality shows that have been accused of exploiting and exacerbating the mental health issues of their participants. So one that comes to mind for me is Love Island, where unfortunately, like they've had several participants who've died by suicide, and those participants, they did note that they were experiencing a lot of online bullying and harassment and that kind of thing, and just overall negative media coverage. So there's that where people have kind of their whole lives exposed in a lot of ways, and then once the show's over, then they're kind of still dealing with that aftermath, right? Or maybe that never really ends. And the show and everything, it's all moved on, right? And like even as consumers, we might, I don't remember that character anymore, like or that participant anymore, right? We all kind of move on. And so I think there's that on one hand. And then on the other side, we see shows. I like The Real Housewives. I watch almost all of them. Like I'm not. It's not even a guilty pleasure. I just love it. So I don't feel bad about it at all. Yeah. And I've noticed that you often see them experiencing therapy. Right? They're talking to a therapist. They're talking to a life coach. Like it's very on most of the franchises. It's pretty common, right? And so I think that's an interesting kind of development in reality shows that here people are recognizing that I'm going through this trauma and I need to talk to someone and I'm going to put that on camera, which is a pretty bold thing to do. What do you think about that, about with the reality shows and unscripted shows, how we see just like kind of that, dichotomy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously there have been situations and things like what happened on Love Island that have maybe made unscripted productions realize that they have to do more to be there for the contestants and the participants while they are shooting productions. We at TheWrap, we did a story about the making of this season of Love Island USA, which was just a huge hit and obviously had a lot of drama on it. And as we were reporting, we got to the details that they do have therapists on site during production, which is great and a valuable resource for people that are kind of like in this vacuum and are dealing with drama and like all of that drama will then be on television. It's tricky because obviously, if the resources are there while you're shooting, that's great. And like that, they help you get through it at the time. But then, the experience is over and you go out into the world. And like, in the case of Love Island, that was being produced in real time. So like the episodes were already out. So by the time they got out, they were already like huge stars and a lot of the conversation had already happened. But obviously all of that, like going from someone who maybe wasn't necessarily well known to becoming a huge star, like all of that is going to impact you. And I mean, I don't know if it would be fair to expect that the show themselves stick with these folks forever, like and pay for their therapy forever.
I think that's unlikely.
But I do think, like, as any employer would maybe just make sure that the resources that are available to a person or to talent, that they're aware of them. And then it's up to that person to also like try to go and seek the help that they need if they feel overwhelmed.
Yes.
It's interesting because when I remember as we were watching Love Island USA, which was such a hit, the host Ariana Madix, who had her own moment in the spotlight, a lot of drama, a lot of scandal, just reflected with the Islanders about how, once you get to a certain level of reality TV and even reality TV in general, the general public sees you as a character.
Yes,
they
so
see
true.
you like it's not necessarily taking into account, I'm a person. I am going through all of these things and like I'm experiencing all of this and now I'm a huge star, blah, blah, blah. They're just kind of like watching the show, being entertained and commenting like they would a scripted show. Like they would talk about whatever is happening on Grey's Anatomy this week, So, not to say that, society needs to be nice to reality TV stars, but it's a complicated situation. And I guess it's up to the people that are in charge of the shows to make sure that the talent knows what they can do to seek help if they want it.
Yes.
And then also to come to the contestants and, hopefully they seek the help that they deserve and want.
I think that's such a brilliant point because there's a lot of ways in which they're kind of allowing people to know this is a resource, right? So by having it on set, you're right, it's not realistic. They're going to provide free therapy for the rest of someone's life. But they've already maybe gotten people into a habit where they're like, oh, it feels good to talk to someone. And so now I know that that's a resource available to me or something that I'm willing to seek out where I might not have before. And so I think that that is really helpful. And then I think also, we're aware that sometimes the wilder a character is, the better television, the better ratings, right? And so if we're being honest and being realistic, there's only so much screening that they're going to be doing, because they want to have a good character. And look, I'm even saying character, like you were just saying, right? These are real people, and I think it is so easy to forget, right? Because you're seeing them on screen week after week, and it's an edited version of them and that kind of thing, but you do forget that they are human beings in the world. And so I think even that reminder is really powerful, to think about, to remember, when people are making comments, and like that kind of thing, that you are talking about a real person, not a character they played,
Right.
So,
and I mean, these folks know what they're signing up for. So like there's I guess there's an expectation that what you do on camera will most likely be used if it ends up being bad. And like, as you said, they're not necessarily going to be trying to hold someone back from having a difficult moment on screen because they want to have that so they can put it on the show. I guess I don't know enough about production to know if things are incentivized in any way. There have been scandals in certain franchises where people had a lot of access to alcohol and that caused more negative situations. And I do think that for the most part, those types of issues have been course corrected as trouble has happened. But yeah, I mean, it's like we said, it's a difficult conversation.
It is.
But on the other side too, the thing that you mentioned, the shows are also trying to of chronicling these folks' real lives. A show like The Housewives will show one of the stars going to therapy and working on herself, and like a lot of the times that is the talent like deciding to bring that up for discussion and like just wanting to bring that conversation forward. And I think that part is really important. Especially because it helps a lot of people, again, because it's a way for viewers to be like, maybe I can get this help too.
Right. And I think especially I notice it, and I think it's powerful on a show like The Real Housewives because, it is meant to be aspirational. Like you're, looking at these people, they have this, often like amazing life, a lot of money and like all those kinds of things. And you're like, oh, they're doing it. Right. And so I think that also is a important message as well. Like who's doing it, who's making you feel like, okay, oh, I could do this. I don't have to feel bad about doing this. Look, someone's putting this on TV, and so like that whole experience, and I think that is, I think it's just like a really fascinating approach, and so it's interesting for you to say that it's because that the stars themselves are saying like, I want to show this,
Yeah. I mean, again, it would have to depend on the show, and I don't know how much producers are like, oh, you're in therapy. How about we follow you?
Yeah, but you could also say no. And I think most people would say no.
I guess that could happen, but I mean, at the end of the day, it is the star. Like you can't just be like, force yourself into a therapy session,
No, you can't.
It feels like, so at least, from the side of, I guess, common sense, I'll say that they are willingly participating in bringing these conversations forward. Now when it's, a difficult moment and that part, that is another side of the coin, but yeah.
I think for me too, I also find it so interesting because so much of therapy is about privacy and confidentiality and that kind of thing. And so when I see people sharing their experiences on screen, whether it's housewives or it's like, couples therapy. I feel I have, kind of two thoughts about it. I really think it's amazing and very brave. And, you wonder sometimes how much are you getting out of it, because don't we mostly naturally censor ourselves a little bit? If you know you're going to be on camera, you might be saying different things that I would say if I'm just sitting in a room with my therapist, right? And so I think on Real Housewives, I'm sure, that we just see a bit of it. But on shows where like couples therapy, it's like you're seeing their session, you also see the therapist go to see her therapist. And I think that, I think I'm of two minds about it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it depends. Again, it depends on the show, because obviously, The Housewives is kind of like this aspirational or, like just people witnessing the mess in some ways. Whereas, a show like Couples Therapy, it's like actively trying to like broadcast this therapist's efforts and like seeing these couples that agree to bring their
everything
mess out into the world,
everything,
and with the goal of hopefully raising awareness and getting other people to figure out their issues. So yeah, I think it depends on the programming, but I do think that most of it can be helpful in expanding the wider understanding on mental health and like the resources that are available, and I think showing people what happens in a session takes away some of like the scariness,
as well. So I think that is helpful. So, in thinking about some scripted shows, so like one show that a lot of people are discussing now is the Monsters series about the Menendez brothers. And we've even seen that the show has brought about a call for like the release and all of these kinds of things. Although it seems like a lot of the family has had issues with the show and everything. So, I mean, with so many shows depicting real people and real events, like what do you think about the mental health experience for the original subjects or their family and friends of seeing their lives portrayed on screen? How do you think that their real lives are impacted by that?
I mean, I think it could be greatly impacted, depending on how the show is perceived and like the way that the show depicts what like that part of real life. Monsters is such a unique scenario and such a cultural phenomenon, like something that I think every streamer would want to have. But I think about how like in the beginning there was a lot of criticism about how the depiction of it made it like a caricature, and like there was a lot about the choices of what was shown visually, a lot of these like theories about why the brothers were doing what they did and all of that crime. And even the family came out and criticized the show publicly, but you see it from the other side, and you see that the show has brought a visibility to the case that it hasn't had in decades. And at this point, they are considering they have this potential resentencing hearing. I mean, Ryan Murphy already speculated that they're going to be free before the end of the year. And that if something like a TV show can have that impact, maybe the family's not going to be super happy about how it was depicted, but at the end of the day, are they going to be upset that the show helped free these people that have been in cages forever?
Absolutely.
It would it's so like when it comes to that show specifically, it's very complex, because like if it does end up leading to them being free, I feel like the last thing they're gonna think about was how upset they were.
I think you're absolutely right about that. I think that for them, this was a good thing. You're right. I haven't thought about the Menendez brothers in many, many years, and I think also because it happened at a time where we didn't get constant information about everything. Like you hear a news story, it's in the newspaper, and then it moves on, then you move on too. Like you're not, you can't go down a rabbit hole online. Like, you couldn't do that then. And so I do think that for those kinds of situations where the people are still living, they're able to see this, or their family members are able to see this, it could be, a double-edged sword for them. It could be amazing that, they're released, if that's what the family wants. I'm not commenting on like whether or not they should be released.
Yeah.
But you're right, that could be like a real benefit for them. And even if they didn't like it, people watched and people
Exactly.
paid attention, and and it made
It brought
people
about this conversation.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I mean, obviously, it's complicated, and we've seen similar cases. There was all of the Gypsy Rose Blanchard
Yes,
content,
yes.
like that started
Yeah.
with documentaries, which then became limited series,
Yes.
and all of that kind of like started that movement that she served her time, and now
Yes.
she's happy, and like
Yes.
she has a docuseries now where we are seeing her with life after all that happened. It's those unique scenarios where maybe having the story depicted on screen wasn't necessarily damning.
Yeah.
But then there's like the baby reindeer of it all, which like it's a dramatized version of real events, but you see the quote unquote the woman that claims to be the real life Martha suing Netflix for the depiction of it.
Absolutely.
So someone like that probably isn't too happy about
No.
that they were depicted on screen.
No, that's not been a win for her. I mean,
Yeah.
I get it was a cultural phenomenon. Everyone was watching it, and it just really brought a lot of things to light that I think had not been, really shared widely. And agreed that then someone coming forward and being like, "That's about me," it's not good. There's no really positive like portrayal of her in there, know?
Yeah, but at the same time, like the show wasn't like it wasn't actually, it wasn't like Monsters. It wasn't trying to retell or dramatize real events.
Yes.
It was something that happened to someone, and it was that story fictionalized from their experience and made completely different, allegedly. So like like I said, I guess it all comes down to, it depends on the show, it depends on the topic. Like you can't it's also gonna like come from the perspectives of the people that are featured, like
That's right.
and for how the public responds to it. Baby Reindeer also brought a lot of conversations about male sexual assault and why people wouldn't necessarily react to being in that situation with an immediate, I'm going to call the police. It's like, maybe I have empathy for this person. And why do I have empathy for this person? And all of those little conversations, I think, are helpful in the long run.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. I think for the shifts in culture, that could be really valuable. Definitely. So you mentioned the George Floyd episode of Station 19 earlier. And, I was thinking that with George Floyd, we saw a push for more like diversity, everywhere, and including in the entertainment industry. But we also know that sometimes that can be fleeting, right? On the other hand, I think that after Me Too, especially, that there was a greater call for positions like intimacy coordinators on set, and that kind of has become the norm a little bit. And people ask for that when they're going into taking different roles that might be challenging. How do you think that we can remain committed to prioritizing mental health, to showing mental health challenges on screen and off screen for the long term?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting topic, and personally, I think that the evolution of mental health discussions on screen is not something that's gonna go away, because audiences have become so much smarter and more open to talking about their own mental health experiences. And like, I think television is usually, or like the goal of it when it comes to programming, is trying to either speak to or inspire conversations. And you want people to talk about what is happening on your show. So because we are becoming a more open society when it comes to these conversations, I think that those topics will still remain at the forefront. There's always going to be a show that explores a character's mental health, or I think of a show like The Irrational on NBC that brings it's centered around a professor of behavioral psychology, and he uses his knowledge to help with just like crime procedurals, like a case of the week. But the lead investigator is this expert in behavioral psychology, so he kind of like solves the cases by getting into the minds of the perps and so that is very fascinating, and I think it's sparking some interesting conversation among viewers, because then you get to kind of like understand why crime happens, not just be like, oh, this is like an evil person and he's doing evil things.
It brings some of the nuance to the conversation around it, and I think then also like awareness as well, like just in the way that like people interact with each other. Okay, there might be something like deeper going on there than just what I'm seeing on the surface with this person. Not that we're encountering like serial killers and everything all the time. I hope not.
Right.
but just in our regular day-to-day interactions, right? Like I wonder if it allows us to like give each other a little bit more grace, or like maybe even curiosity about what people are going through when you're seeing regularly people experiencing challenges and, you know, seeing them in therapy and like all these kinds of things. Like I wonder how it affects us in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, to the point of making sure that people are safeguarded in behind the scenes, it seems like intimacy coordinators are something that is being embraced by the industry. Like I think that the people working in those positions are even like hoping to unionize so that they become more of an established part of the infrastructure of the industry. And it is great that like throughout, you know, all of the big shifts that have happened in the industry in the past couple of years, there has been a lot of good conversation about how intimacy coordinators come in and help casts and you know the talent get through really difficult scenes. Just recently, the Heartstopper, the latest season came out. And they talked about how they've had intimacy coordinators throughout the whole run of the show. So by the time it got to when the two leads had to shoot their first sex scene and go through all of that, they had the comfort of being there with an intimacy coordinator they had known for years to kind of like guide them through, you know, a very awkward work day. And so stuff like that is very beneficial, and hopefully it's something that keeps growing. But you know, we are in a, like as you've mentioned, you know, there was a lot of push for diversity, and it has been great to see all the strides that the industry has made in highlighting voices that aren't necessarily the voices that used to be on TV all the time. And I think some of that evolution will stick around, but we're also at a time of Hollywood contraction and like a lot of shows getting canceled and companies being less willing to take risks, which take risks.
I know.
In quotation marks, means encouraging, encouraging other voices to speak out and like betting on them. So I think that's the part we need to like make sure that we're paying attention to, and make sure that we're supporting shows that do highlight these diverse voices and that we keep them in the conversation so that Hollywood realizes that they can't just, you know, let go of that progress because they need to save money.
That's right. I do think that with intimacy coordinators, it has kind of become the norm. And especially, you know, what you're saying on a show where they do it from the beginning, not when they have the tough scene and you don't have any rapport, like any connection with this person, you know? And so that's a powerful commitment that a show is making by doing that from the beginning. And you know, you do hope that that becomes the same. And, you know, like you were talking about Love Island US, that they're therapists on set, you know, like bringing them in and having them there all the time is valuable, I think, in the same way for people to know that, you know, you're with someone who you could trust. You're not filming necessarily like while you're having their session. And I think that really changes the way that we like look at therapy and the way that we experience therapy. It just help seeking, period, right? Because that's not to say like talk therapy necessarily is for everyone, but like just looking after ourselves, whether you're on TV or not, looking after yourself, I think is so important.
Definitely. I don't know if we have time, but could I ask a question?
Of course.
You're
like, I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
You can't turn off the journalist hat. It's totally fun. Yes.
But I from at the start of this, you mentioned that you love shrinking, but it's not necessarily realistic.
Yes.
I would love to hear more of your thoughts on the show because it's such a huge hit. And
it's great, and I do love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me first let you know that I am probably not the most fun person to watch TV with, because someone's like, oh, I can't believe they're acting like that. I'm like, well, but you see her relationship with her mom, and you can kind of see that maybe she didn't learn how to handle conflict really well. I'm just like, oh God, who cares? Like, I care. But I will say with shrinking, what I love, the idea of the comedy that shows like the therapist point of view. I love seeing their interactions with each other, the therapist interactions with each other. I think they're just like all brilliant. And what's so funny to me is that some of the things that like they do are things that therapists like want to do, which is like, don't go back to that person. They're terrible. But I would love to show up at your house, but I don't, right? And like you lose your license. You can't just like show up to people's houses and like, make them like break up with their partner or whatever. Even though in your mind you're like, please, please don't go back. And I kind of loved and appreciated that, that they act out on some of those feelings that we have. It's like we're sitting like nodding our heads and like, whatever, drinking our coffee, that we're like, oh, please don't, So I think there's definitely things that like the characters do where you would not be licensed if you actually did it. But I appreciate that they are things that you think about doing. Like, how can we like not get back into this mess again, with this person? But I think one of the tricky things about therapy is that people think you're like kind of giving people advice. And really, it's a lot of letting people find their own solutions, because you only see like a small part of their lives. Unlike shrinking, I don't go to anyone's house. I don't see them or that kind of, I don't see them interact with this partner. I may know everything about them, but I don't see them interact with that person. I don't see them parent their kids, right? I just hear their side of it. And so to me, to tell someone what they should do when I'm just getting like a tiny, tiny part of your life is silly and like not that helpful, right? And so I think that there's that part of it, which kind of it's like there's all these myths around it, and I think some of these shows can be helpful in like decrying some of those myths. But I do think that it's elevated. It's for TV, and I laugh and I appreciate it, and I'm like, you would never. Not in a million years would you do some of the stuff that they do, So I think that's probably the unrealistic part of it, and I do think that. We think some of that stuff, then they act on it, and so that there's great. Kind of some enjoyment in that too, because you get that impulse, right?
Yeah,
you understand
there's always something funny about seeing your profession depicted.
Yes. On screen. Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, you probably get that quite a bit.
Oh yeah, sometimes. But and I also find it interesting that how you say that you watch TV and kind of like. Analyze the behaviors of the characters of that stuff. I would love to start that group text.
Oh my God.
Because sometimes I'm like, why is this person doing this?
It's so funny. Like... I mean, actually, I had this conversation with a girlfriend yesterday. She texted me and she's like, are you watching Love is Blind? I'm like, of course I am. And she's like, oh, I can't believe like this character, like this happened. And I was thinking about it and actually just like made a quick TikTok about it, because I was telling her that there's like a character, Marissa. Do you watch Love is Blind?
I am not watching.
It's okay. I could give you like the full update in like 5 minutes. Don't worry.
Thank you.
But there's a character. I'm gonna watch my language around this now, Jose. Like you have me thinking. There's a participant on the show, and she has had a lot of traumatic life events. And when she shares those traumatic life events, she's often like smiling and like kind of in a sing-songy voice. And I was like, what is that? Like that's what she's talking about, and the way that she's delivering it are so disconnected. And then later on, you meet her, they go and meet the families and stuff, and you meet her mother. And unfortunately, her mother has had a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of poverty in the family, that kind of thing. And so the kids grew up in really tough situations, really tough circumstances. And her mother was the complete opposite, like pretty bitter, about like the hands that have been dealt to her, really negative, like about relationships don't last, like this isn't gonna, all those kinds of things. Yeah. And I was thinking like, oh, she's like masking her feelings, and it almost is like she's like providing like counter programming to her mother, right? So if you grow up with someone who's like everything's bad, nothing's good, you're like, that doesn't feel good. Maybe I'll go to this other side where like everything's fine, everything's great, like no matter what I'm telling you, don't worry, nothing to see here. And you're still not tied into your real feelings, You're still like reacting to the way someone else has treated you. But I got it. It made a lot of sense when I saw that because I was always kind of like, God, this is really strange. Like, why are you smiling about that? That sounds terrible, And not that you need to be in tears every second, but it just felt like very incongruent,
there was a disconnect,
So yes, that's the kind of things I think about when I watch TV.
I mean, that's fascinating because I think, I think about that with no psychology background.
Yeah, tell me,
at all,
give me an example. Like what do you watch and you're just like can't just enjoy like the scene?
I mean, I have to think about it. But.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even kind of what you were talking about with Station 19, like it was a seed in a TV show, but like you found like the deeper meaning and like the nuance in that, and you're right. That's like the power of what a good show or like an interesting, entertaining show can do, right?
For sure. Yeah. There's always something like underneath what's happening in, there's something that you're seeing and then there's something that's happening underneath. And maybe from my journalist lens, it's like if I'm trying to figure out an angle for something, I'll look for that deeper meaning. Yes. But yeah, I also watch a lot of TV, so I notice a lot of things, and then I try to figure out where it's coming from.
Yeah, but that makes sense. Like as a journalist, that you would be analyzing, you would be looking beyond like the surface of what you're watching, to try to see what is the bigger story here. I just want to ask you one last question. So, are there any mental health topics that you'd be interested to see discussed more on television?
Ooh. Like a specific example. I mean, I think that, I guess it would depend on what people are interested in learning more about. I think that, there was like during the pandemic, there were a lot of shows that kind of like dove and like movies that dove into like the isolation that we were feeling.
Yes.
And, like then afterwards, like the aftermath of that, like all of that freedom that we got back. Yeah. So it's kind of like I would say maybe like, and TV always does this, but like keeping on kind of like commenting on the stuff that we're going through, especially during this time when it seems like every week we're going through like a different
crisis,
different crisis, different catastrophe.
Yes.
And we also have a lot of information, so it's like, how do we have access to a lot of information? There's the internet, there's TikTok, and like we're just being bombarded with all of these negative things, maybe like seeing a show that, or, like having a show that's already out there, kind of like tackle how we can process all of these things that we're going through so that we don't like feel overwhelmed all the time and find a way to, not feel despondent all the time.
Right? Because I think there's you want things portrayed like honestly and realistically, and at the end of the day we also need like a little bit of hope as well. It's like not just here's this big problem, but like, okay, how are different people trying to work to like manage that? Like what are the different like resources and that kind of thing that are available to us, that I'm seeing people in the shows that I'm watching, that I'm seeing them reach out for. So I do think there's that again, like that balance, right, of like being honest about, okay, this is a real challenge, and then also that that's not the end necessarily of the story, right?
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. It's like we're all going through a lot all the time.
Yes.
So if the content that we're watching can help us either process that or help us like take a break from that too, because like not everything has to also be related to all that we're going through. Like we can also just watch something fun. And,
right.
Like, we watch shows like Love is Blind or Housewives also to escape, to like
absolutely.
take a break from our everyday struggles. So if TV can keep being that escape as well, I think that's also very important.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. It kind of reminds me of, like during the pandemic, like reading a lot about how people were just obsessed with HGTV, because it's very like escape into someone else's life, to go into their home. Like you don't have to think about, what you're dealing with in that moment. And I think, that is interesting. And I watched a lot of HGTV too, and I enjoyed it. And, obviously all of the shows. And I think that there were certain shows that were also popular that brought people together when we were isolated. So I think of like Tiger King, which everyone I knew watched that. And we all had kind of this shared cultural moment, which I think doesn't happen that much anymore because there's so many options for what you can watch. Like every now and then they'll be like, okay, a lot of people are watching this show and you can have a conversation about it. But usually you could be watching something that I've never heard of, easily. And I think that kind of, that when people were like seeking connection, that was one way that people found it.
Yeah, definitely.
Not that Tiger King was like great for people's mental health. I'm not saying that, but it's a point of connection with people.
It kept us busy for
it did keep us busy. Yes, and it did keep the group chat really really lit.
Exactly.
So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is that TV has the power to bring people together, and I think that that's also a really big part of why we love and keep watching TV. And not to take it back to Monsters, but Monsters certainly was a cultural phenomenon and became this thing that everyone was talking about, that people are still talking about. And Love Island USA, everyone, that was a case where it was a streaming show that people were actually tuning in at 6 p.m. every day to watch the episodes because they didn't want to miss the drama. And then
or have a spoiler, right?
Or have a spoiler. And then like thousands of others ended up watching it later and joining the community and all that stuff. So that's also a really big part of why I love television. It also can help bring people together.
Agreed. What you were saying about that episode of Station 19 and the firefighters, and I was sharing my experience with my dad, and talking to the firefighters and the paramedics, and I think that when people ask me about the difficult things that I hear, and experience like all day as a therapist, that they wonder like, how can you like be okay, or how can you like feel light about things, or like hope. You're hearing sometimes like really tough situations. Not that every story is tough, but sometimes it is. And I think the difference for me is that part of the training that you receive as a therapist, hopefully, is to have a ritual or routine to like separate yourself from someone else's story. Like it doesn't benefit me to take that home with me, right? And now I'm going to have a much harder time being like a good friend, a good wife, a good mother, because I'm thinking about this person who I was with earlier today and the stuff that they're going through. But that's not helpful to them. And I also think if you're going from a situation like that into another client, like you also deserve to have the full picture of me and not me in the past with that other client, right? And so I think that is really helpful to have like a ritual of sorts to not to, I wouldn't even consider it compartmentalizing. I don't think you're trying to avoid that happened. You're just like, what do I need to do to be present now? And how do I get there, right? And I think that that's something that I find really beneficial. But like for people who are in positions and careers where you are, part of your job is to be tough, right? If you're in the military, if you're a paramedic, if you're a firefighter, you've got to be tough. And you don't have necessarily like the training then to know how to look after yourself after a really tough day and then to go and be present. And I don't even know that it's something that is like considered an asset necessarily. Like, what do you think?
No, I mean, yeah, like if we go back to talking about, the episode, like one of the things that really stayed with me was their explanation as to why the therapist was so forward with her own story. And basically like her explanation is that, someone like a firefighter is used to bottling all of that stuff up so that they can stay tough and like not really let all of it in so they can keep doing the very hard job that they're doing. So she tells her story in the hopes of encouraging these people to open up to her, which is something that they're not used to doing. In terms of like what you're saying, and like I'm glad that you and your profession get training for how to kind of like stay present and be able to like not leave it behind, but just not let it get to you too much, I guess. I obviously I can't compare myself to military or police or therapists, but I think that journalists can relate to that plight as well, because I may be a a measly entertainment
Not
journalist.
measly, I was saying, not at all.
But
TheWrap is a
we
leading
do.
publication.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I'll stay modest. But like we do deal with. Oftentimes we deal with really difficult news,
Yes.
and like it's happening 24/7. Sometimes there's a big celebrity death
Yes.
that maybe you don't know that person, but you grew up with that person.
Yes.
And you have to kind of like not brush your feelings aside, but kind of like the work and informing people and making sure that you're, doing your job has to come first.
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, I find myself compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
And like in years that I've been doing this job, I've kind of like developed a kind of like defense mechanism to kind of like put those feelings in a tiny box.
Tell me about that if you don't mind. I know this is not a therapy session, but like whatever. I'm just curious. It's okay.
It's like it can be hard, but when you are being bombarded with a lot of difficult news or like covering layoffs across the industry, layoffs across your own industry, because media is going through it, both in Hollywood and in digital publications, newspapers, like it's all changing so much.
Absolutely.
And as as a team, if you're covering this, like you have to kind of like let the job be the first thing that comes, and then you can figure out how you're feeling later, which is it's hard, I guess. On the journalism side, we don't really have a how to cope with terrible news.
No, and you have deadlines.
Class,
you also like have to get over your feelings. So you have a deadline, and that's really tough.
If a really big name passes away, you have seconds to turn the story around. So there's not really like any time to process it in the moment. So you process it later. But thankfully there's also a lot of positives.
Yes.
Kind of like help you.
That's true. That's true. It balances, but I do think it's such a good point. I'm really glad that you shared that, because I don't think that like sometimes we think about the people like who's telling the story, right? And like what they're experiencing, because if I'm devastated by news that I read about, someone passing away, like, oh my God, I can't believe that, especially like when it's very untimely, you have to get all the facts, get it out to people, and like there's less time for like your feelings about it, right? At least like in the moment.
You kind of just have to like I said, kind of like be present in the work, and then like later on you can maybe revisit it later, but then there's
something else that's coming up, right?
Something else is going to come up. Maybe something fun that can like counteract like the bad part of the day. But and we're all dealing with that type of stuff, especially as as we were talking about earlier, like you're being bombarded with all of this information. We just get to be the deliverers of that information, but we are getting
you're
it
still
too,
experiencing
and have
it
to
though,
process it,
right? I just imagine like the roller coaster of emotions on a single day, and you have no idea like
Literally.
kind of like what we were talking about, like with the paramedics and like fire, you don't know what's coming that day. You have no idea, right? But you have to like get there and take action on it, and like might be something amazing and a great story that you're happy to cover. It might be something like, oh God, that's like really
really
a
sad,
bummer.
Really difficult. But you just kind of ride the wave and I'll let you know when you process the feelings.
You can call me.
We'll see.
We can process. I think that's for me like part of the motivation for bringing like the discussion of mental health into pop culture, because I love pop culture and I loved working in entertainment, and now there's like another lens that I look at this stuff through. I still enjoy it, but it's a little bit different. So I definitely believe in like the power of entertainment for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to everyone for tuning in to this episode. Jose Alejandro Bastidas, television editor at TheWrap. It's been like such a great conversation. I really, really appreciate your insight and you sharing, your experiences from the journalist point of view, and also just like as a fan. I think it's been really great. So Jose, if people want to like know what's going on with you, catch up on like your stories and that kind of thing, like how can they follow you?
Well, all of our stories post on TheWrap.com, so I'll plug the job first.
Please do.
And then I'm on Twitter and on Instagram. It's at JA Bastidas.
Okay.
So, do you want me to spell it out?
You can, but we'll also like post it with the episode and everything.
Yeah, so that should work.
Wonderful.
And otherwise I'm around watching TV.
Excellent. Well, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Therapy with Dr. Patrice. And my website's drpatricelegoy.com. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in.